Hi everyone. So this is going to be a very impromptu video. I was just sitting on my lanai, feeling the wind blow, listening to the birds sing, seeing the beautiful and countless examples of spring occurring around me. So many of my flowers are in bloom. I discovered a wisteria in my garden that I had no clue existed. Actually didn't know what plant it was, and it just like miraculously bloomed one morning. I was like, wow. Um, just sipping my coffee and just really enjoying my morning, and feeling. I was feeling something that honestly I've been feeling for a little while now, and it kind of culminated in this moment of peace that I've been having this morning, where I experienced a realization of how far I've come, and how much I've accomplished. Not so much in like a material way, although certainly that's happened too, but in a spiritual way, in my mindset, and how I interact with the world. There have been a lot of things that have happened to me, very huge, powerful, honestly, like world-destroying things that have happened to me. And they've certainly have played their part in this kind of new realization. But throughout all of that, the main driving force towards me being who I am today has been, and hopefully will always be, the goddess. And, you know, obviously I follow two very specific goddesses, Aphrodite and Freya, but I would like to, in this video, speak about my relationships with them in a very general sense. So from here on out, I am just going to use the general phrase, the goddess, as representing a kind of divine feminine force, working through my life, through the universe, etc. So I think I've been worshiping some form of the goddess since 2012, maybe even earlier than that. The facts are a little fuzzy, but right before I moved to be with my dad, I was going to continue going to school. I was praying to Selene, the moon goddess, and really then I left my mom, so she kind of took that role in my life. I think that was certainly something that I was needing at the time. From then, I moved into worshiping Hecate, and then from there, Aphrodite and Freya. And I think even just within those names, you can see a kind of arc in the way that I treated the concept of the goddess, the concept of the divine feminine. Um, you know, initially, I think I saw it as being something kind of separate from myself, something that I could tap into, that could provide a kind of guideline in my life or wisdom. And certainly that element is still there, for sure. But it has become more complicated as I think I transitioned from being a child to being at least something that can come across as being an adult. Back when I was praying to Selene, it was from a place where I truly didn't know anything, and I was very humbly walking upon my hands and my knees towards her, like begging her to give me the right answer. But like I said, so many things have happened since then, as they do with you know, everyone's lives. I think for someone as young as I am, I'm only 25, I've experienced some things that most people don't get to experience. It's a funny way to say it. Don't experience until they're typically older. And then there are others who experience it much younger. To kind of clarify that a little bit without getting too far into it, my mom actually passed away in January of this year. So that is one thing that has occurred that has provided this kind of shift. But if anything, that was kind of the culmination of the shift in mindset that I've been talking about. Because throughout the years, from the time that I moved to attempt to start going back to school, to the time that I moved back, to going to a new school, living in a new city where I was a complete stranger, all of these things happened. And of course, during this time, I was actually researching things and delving into the psychology of the goddess or the mythology of the goddess, and learning new perspectives on who she is and how she can actually exist in someone's life and subconscious. One of the, I would say, seminal works of literature that has taken like a focal point in my concept of the goddess and my relationship with her is The Meaning of Aphrodite by Paul Friedrich. It's the first book that I read that was specifically about Aphrodite, that specifically talked about her mythos and her cult, and especially her cult, because I think it's relatively easy to find books that are going to be about the actual stories in which these gods or goddesses occur in. It's difficult unless you read, and this is an academic source, even though it's kind of a shorter book. But unless you get into, unless you're in like a college class and you're reading a literal textbook, it's difficult to get into what people actually did back in the day when these gods and goddesses weren't considered dead. They were thriving, and you could walk down the street and discover a small statue and altar devoted to Athena or Artemis or whoever. So through that book, I learned how, I guess, the masses of ancient Greece actually experienced Aphrodite as a living force. How, to them, she really surpassed the most basic concept of what a love goddess is. She became really a philosophy to them. And if you read Plato's Symposium, you'll also understand to some extent, obviously that's a work of fiction, but to some extent, the layers of the layers in which ancient Greece conceptualize the concept of love embodied by Aphrodite. It is incredibly nuanced. That being said, within all of that, the thing that really, I think, struck home with me was viewing Aphrodite as being a liminal goddess. And if you've been in this realm of witchy things or pagan things for a while, you probably have heard that term liminal be used before. Essentially, what it means is living or existing between spaces. So, I'd always heard of that in reference to, I don't know, I guess witchier goddesses maybe, like Hecate, for example. It surprised me when I heard Aphrodite being referred to as that, because I think for so long I viewed her as being a pretty obvious goddess. You know, she's the goddess of love and beauty. That is all you would think kind of superficial, at least the way that people kind of played it up over time. They made it superficial, probably because she's a goddess and therefore a woman, and also because I think we treat beauty as being pretty superficial, and so often love is actually considered as being lust, which lust is, by definition superficial. You are desiring something because of the way that it looks, the beauty that it holds, right? So this concept of her as a liminal goddess changed, I think, my relationship with her immensely. Um, and to explain a little bit what they're talking about, because I think with Aphrodite, the concept of being a liminal goddess is different, to some extent, from the other goddesses and gods who are considered to be such a thing. From what I can remember, and please read this book for yourself, it's rife with wonderful information. But from what I can recall, speaking of Aphrodite as being a liminal goddess, they were touching upon the concept of love, obviously, specifically that it lives both inside of yourself and outside of yourself. So, to talk about one of the most obvious relationships, let's talk about a romantic relationship. So, you meet someone, they're beautiful, you fall head over heels, you feel it so immensely in yourself, your heart feels like it's gonna beat outside of your chest and plop on the ground. That is one aspect of it. But you also, in theory, carry those feelings and push them through the actions of your body. So you love this person, feels like your heart's gonna explode. You wake up in the morning and you make them breakfast in bed. Or their parent has died and you sit up with them all night long, you hold their hand, you cradle them in your arms as they cry on your shoulders. Those acts of service that express the love that you feel on the inside. And additionally, there's a third part, which is the person who loves you, who you're in a relationship with. That person does all of those same things for you, if they're a good person, right? If they're showing their love in a healthy way, they are expressing that love to you in a physical way as well. And obviously that physical act of love varies depending on person, or from person to person. So, for some people, expressing love could be making love, or it could be doing your taxes for someone, or picking them up from work. Even some of the most mundane acts of service could be really beautiful expressions of love. But the point of me bringing that up is that you have these 3 points of existences that all within one concept exists, the concept being love. So I think that kind of rounds out the idea of Aphrodite being a liminal goddess. She exists really in 3 spaces. And there's even more to that. Like I said, Aphrodite is kind of a philosophical concept that becomes even more universal than that. I'm gonna have a sip of my coffee because I keep forgetting about it. It's getting cold. I can feel it. But oh yeah, that's lukewarm. But I'm gonna push through it. But yeah, so it's a universal concept. She is a universal concept. Speaking about love between 2 people, that love, obviously, if you've been alive as a human being for any amount of time, you've experienced love in more than just that way, right? More than just a romantic love. The love between a child and their mother. The love between 2 friends. The love between an individual and their community and our society. Love stretches and encompasses every feeling thing, really. The love between a person and their pet, between a person or a community and the nature with which they live, in which they live. And then beyond that, more than the acts of service, it also encompasses, in general, I guess, the law of attraction. In order to exist, things need to attract and be attracted to something else. And this exists, obviously, in human beings, through finding someone to fall in love with and, having children one day. Obviously, not everyone has kids. Not everyone develops romantic feelings, but a large majority of us do, and it leads typically to reproduction, which continues our species. And that also exists within animals and within plants, and even within like the smallest parts of ourselves. Our DNA, our cells, they all multiply and reproduce in some capacity. And it all started with that initial spark, which is, I mean, ultimately the spark of creativity. And that is yet another facet of the love goddess. Specifically, I'm talking a lot about Aphrodite because, first of all, there's more information about her than the other love goddess that I work with, or who I work with, which is Freya. And then second of all, I did have a second of all, but it's not coming to me. I mean, there's more information. This concept I read about specifically was in relation to Aphrodite. I do think that it could relate to other love goddesses as well, as a concept, obviously. Freya, I think I'll get into more in the future because I don't want to overcomplicate this. Like I said, I plan on making a video about her specifically anyway. So yeah, I'll just kind of leave that where it is. Just know that I'm not ignoring Freya out of like any kind of favoritism or because I feel like this is not in some way related to her as well, being a love goddess. I just think that with her, there is a different kind of nuance that I would prefer to explore alone, So anyway, speaking about the spark, the initial spark, people call it the Big Bang. It is really like the spark of creativity, and that's, like I said, another facet of the love goddess. Specifically talking about Aphrodite right now. And the parallels are I think pretty obvious for most people. If you're going to talk about love that begins mysteriously, out of the ether, we don't really understand it, that concept, then leading into a relationship, which, creates lots of different things, not just children, but inevitably, usually, children, or a home, or a future, but specifically children as like a symbol, as like, yeah, a metaphor, I guess. I think it's pretty logical to carry that line through other things that you can create, such as art, or a business, or, I don't know, really anything that you're capable of creating. So all of those things, being some kind of example of having children, devoting your time, energy, and love into something to make it beautiful and worthwhile and good. I think those are all the ways that the love goddess, and perhaps even, and I'm kind of, maybe going too far with this, but perhaps an example of the goddess in general, not just a love goddess. I think the reason why I specifically focus on love goddesses, and it wasn't something that was intentional, it really was random. Like I said, I began worshiping Selene first, and then transitioned into Hecate. At some point after I was worshiping Aphrodite and Freya, I attempted to develop a relationship with Iset, or Isis, as well, and I didn't have the same connection initially. You know, and I tried for a long time to continue developing that relationship, but it just wasn't the same for some reason. And like I said, it was kind of random. With Aphrodite, I was really young. I was maybe 19. And I really wanted to fall in love. So I prayed to Aphrodite, much like many people have before me. Sappho comes to mind, um, asking for her to please grant me this prayer. Um, and inevitably, she did. And it was a really wild experience. Still kind of happening. Um, but so worthwhile. And it taught me so much. I think, and you know, that right there, I think, is why she's taken on such a prominent role in my life, is because, yes, like I fell in love with someone else. And I think typically nowadays we try to teach people to not rely so much on another human being, which I think is totally a worthwhile concept, obviously. Don't rely so much on another human being that you lose your ability to identify yourself. That being said, I actually feel like through my relationship, which did ultimately end up, I don't know if failing is the right word, but no longer remaining being, it wasn't like a cookie cutter example of like what a relationship should be. But it did, I think, teach me, uh, you know, the opposite of what I was just talking about, of losing my identity in a relationship. I actually feel like I began to understand even more who I am as a human being, what I want, um, who I want to be, what I'm okay with, what I'm not okay with. And I've, I think ultimately it depends on your relationship with love, right? My relationship, I think, because of my relationship with Aphrodite, who embodies love, was always to try to be, to my best, a deeply compassionate human being, empathetic, kind, caring, giving, always trying to understand the other human being. And I went through a long process of balancing being that person and trying to also defend myself within my relationship. Because there were times when I don't think that I was being treated very well. And instinctually, I felt like I should always keep like forgiving and trying to understand and patch up, you know, whatever problems that really the other person, sometimes me, but the other person who, once again, not to get into like the gritty details, but the other person who I don't think was, who was ultimately, I think, more selfish than me, for better or worse. That was the direction that he was taking in his life. I was taking a different direction. They didn't mesh very well. So ultimately, like, I reached a point, I think, at the end of that relationship where I realized a way of being both, of being able to say something along the lines of, hey, this happened. I understand where you're coming from. I think these are the reasons why you did what you did or said what you did, but it made me feel this way, and that's not okay. So I'm willing to give you the time to discuss this in a calm manner, without anger or malice, to see if we can come to some kind of solution. And then recognizing if that person is not capable of doing that because they don't want to, or because they don't care about my feelings, even enough to like try to understand where I'm coming from, in a peaceful way, then fine. Then I gave you the opportunity to work on this, to understand each other, to be good. And you didn't want to do that. So fine. It's not a failing on my part. It's not a failing on your part, necessarily. I still obviously have to work on some things because that last part was difficult for me to say. But yeah, I mean, usually it's not really a failing on either people's part. It's just a matter of that situation wasn't right, right? If it was right, then you would have two people who are working towards something together. And not so much that it would be easy, but it would certainly be easier, I think. You know, it's much easier to take an age-old metaphor to put a circle peg into a circle hole than it is to put a square peg in a circle hole, you know? If the parts fit, they would. So, yeah, it just, and that lesson wasn't just for that romantic relationship. I've carried that lesson throughout my life in so many other things. I remember a time right towards like the beginning of getting into that relationship that I was just talking about, where I was working a job that I was getting paid pretty well, and I was in a position of authority. People respected me, and they thought that and it's really not even as dramatic as that, but I did reach like a place of a certain kind of notoriety, I guess, within the company that I was working for. But I wasn't happy, and I was constantly angry at work, and I actually like yelled at people sometimes, which is so insane to me. And from there, I think by learning all these lessons with love, it actually was able to provide me patience and understanding for everyone, like even the strangers in my life, even, you know, dare I say, customers, people who typically don't even afford you the right to say, like, I'm a human being and I deserve a certain level of respect, right? And also, gosh, this is unraveling, I can tell, but also, like, what happened with my mom and her passing away, and even before that, she had stage 4 breast cancer, experiencing that with her, and it's horrible, and it's still very horrible. I think about her every single day, and I miss her every single day. But throughout that horribleness, I was able to express to her how deeply I cared for her. You know, I was given the opportunity to speak very candidly with her, which a lot of people don't have that opportunity. Throughout the busyness of everyday life that we take so much for granted, we miss out on the opportunities to really share our true feelings with people, which are so meaningful to them. You know, that's what keeps them going, ultimately. Or that's what provides peace to them. So I had ample time. I came back to actually take care of her and help her with the house, and take her to her appointments if I needed to, and in general, just be here with her. I was able to spend that time with her. In the final moments, I was able to tell her how much I loved her and hear that back from her. I was able to reconnect with my brother. All these things where I think ultimately, I mean, there are definitely things that I wish could have been different. You know, I wish it hadn't happened at all. But I think ultimately we all experience losing our parents, right? That's inevitable. So what happened to me and what happened to her to some extent was inevitable. She was always going to pass away. So I have to be grateful, I think, then, for the things that aren't a given. It wasn't a given that I had the opportunity to spend so much time with her before she passed. It wasn't a given that I was able to tell her how much I loved her and in her current state, for her to be able to recognize what I was actually saying and feel it and say it back to me. You know, that was really powerful and really amazing, and I am really grateful for that in spite of everything that happened. I don't have any regrets about really anything with her. I mean, as always, I will always feel like, you know, I could have done more, because I think we can always do more. But for the most part, I know that she knew how I felt about her, how much I cared about her. And yeah, like, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for everything that she gave me too. You know, I'm grateful for having her in my life, and she gave me this house that I'm living in now, which is, you know, filled with nature and is honestly like so much hard work, but I think it's good for me. And you know, this is, to get back to what I was talking about before, this is the example of love and the way that it works in your life. If you love people, really truly love people, and you give them all of yourself, and you try to be like as compassionate and understanding as possible without losing yourself in that, it, I don't know, it changes your life so much for the better. All of this, like all of this, you can't see it because you're on a video screen, but you can hear, I'm sure, the sounds of nature. And you know, I have like the most wonderful dog in the world now. I mean, I always had her, but now she's just mine. And all of these possibilities, all these opportunities, all of this I owe to love. Love being in my life from the time I was born to now. And that's really amazing. And that's why it's so important to me. And that's why like it's enough for me in like a spiritual sense. And you know, this is very like love and light, woohoo kind of stuff. But I never turned my eyes from that concept, as much as that is like kind of maligned, and people want to focus on the dark and gritty because that seems more realistic or whatever. I think that the love and the light is ultimately what carries you through the dark and the gritty. And certainly the dark and the gritty has its place in my spiritual practice. With Freya in particular, I think that is more expressed. But even with her, I always kind of picture her in concept as being kind of like a flame in the dark, or a star, that pinpoint bit of light, that you can focus on within the night of like the world, like all of the depressing stuff, you know? So yeah, and I think also this is a very long video. Hopefully you guys are keeping up, but I did want to talk about one other thing. And I have talked about this in past videos before. But also as a gay man, being able to worship love in a very real sense, has also allowed me to heal this part of myself that for so long within society, within my own family as well, has been also maligned and degraded, and made fun of, or kept secret. Worshipping love, recognizing where that feeling comes from, that that feeling is divine, that it springs from a place that is outside of myself and inside of myself. And in that way, kind of uncontrollable, and granted. It's allowed me to, I guess, forgive myself for like being who I am. And I think that I feel like that phrase might come across as being kind of self-shaming. That might seem kind of self-shaming, but truly, like, I had to experience a process where I realized who I was, that who I was okay. To forgive myself for being what I at one point thought was a kind of monstrosity, to get dramatic, and to allow myself to experience the freedom of, like, knowing who I truly am and accepting myself for that. And that has led into, once again, so many different aspects of my life. I just went on 2 dates recently of, really, they are probably not going to go anywhere. But in comparison to, like, the beginning of my romantic life, to who I am now, sitting in that seat across from that complete stranger, really, I was experiencing, like, complete calm while I was talking to them. I didn't really feel nervous at all, and I expressed everything that I wanted to express and was able to, like, be silent when I didn't have anything to say and sit in that silence and be comfortable with, like, who I am and how I was being experienced by the other person. And I felt a lot of peace and calm and certainty. And once again, that's all of this that I've been talking about in this video. It's it's focusing on that aspect of love, I think, that makes you compassionate towards other people. Because I think that compassion towards the strangeness of life, the variations of it, the uniqueness of each individual person, their quirks, the things that make them weird or interesting or maybe sometimes even distasteful. If you can have compassion for those types of people, recognize their worth in spite of society saying that they're not worthwhile, or your own, I guess, perspective of what is worthwhile, being able to be compassionate towards those people, I think, necessarily makes you more compassionate towards yourself, more forgiving towards yourself, which should make you also a better human being, because you're recognizing that you aren't perfect, just like no one's perfect, and we're all working on something together, which is hopefully to be a better human being. And therefore, if you make a mistake, great, you made a mistake, apologize for it, work on the part of you that makes mistakes like that, I feel like that's a very simple way of explaining it, but yeah, like, if I say something stupid on a first date, I'm not gonna beat myself up for it for the rest of my life. It is what it is, I don't know. Wow, this video, I think, is probably ending on a very anticlimactic note, but that's all I have to say, I think. I hope that you found some meaning in this video. It did get a little bit there was a lot of tangents happening in it. But hopefully you're able to keep up. I'm going to make a more concerted effort to make more videos in the future. I do have, I think, at least 2 videos on Freya that I want to put up, and then we'll go from there. But it was nice chatting with you guys. Thank you so much for experiencing this moment with me, and I will talk to you again in the future. All right? Bye.